Hi everyone, my name is Matthew. Welcome to my Q&A for the Australia-New Zealand Fontan Advisory Committee. Just a quick little brief about myself. So I'm currently 32 and I had a Fontan and now have had a heart transplant. So my Q&A is going to be pretty heavily swayed towards transplant and transplant life. So just a quick, before I get into the questions, just a quick little, I suppose, introductory of my life and what I've been through. So basically I had an extracardiac Fontan when I was 2 in 1987. And then I'm pretty sure in the time frame from both talking to the registry and sort of just the time frame that I was the first person in Australia to actually have the Fontan revision. So I was actually, when I sort of needed that revision, there was a lot of questions up in the air and there was no real surgical team or hospital that really knew or had done it, knew what they were going to do. So myself and my family were possibly even looking at having it done overseas, but fortunately didn't need to go down that route and we had a good team organise what they were going to do here. So basically, my heart condition was basically a single ventricle, a double outlet right ventricle, so a hypoplastic right ventricle, large VSD, pulmonary atresia, aortic regurgitation, single ventricle circuit is pretty much the main thing that doesn't really work. It was discovered shortly after I was born, sort of started turning blue, parents started freaking out a little bit, and then finally, good old doctors come and save the day. And I've had a BT shunt when I was a day old or so, the Fontan revision when I was 20, so really managed quite a long time with that, but I'll get more into that. So I'll start off with some questions. Basically, first question is, what did you find most challenging about growing up with the Fontan circulation from the young age, and what did yourself and your family do to help you meet those challenges? I suppose when I was really young, I didn't really think that I was that different, I suppose. I mean, like, I knew I was different and I had the scar to know I was different and, constant appointments and INRs and all that stuff. But didn't really think much of it. I suppose the challenges were really more on my parents in having to, raise and care for quite a sick child. Well, not even quite sick, just constant medical appointments. Back in the day, INRs were, they would fluctuate quite a lot, so it was hospital trips every week or 2 weeks to go to the children's to have an INR done. That took up a lot of Saturdays back in the day. And so, yeah, and otherwise, when I was still in primary school and stuff, I'd run around and try and play sport. I was usually in a position where I would be running a lot less than the other kids, I suppose. So playing sports, being on a defensive side rather than an offensive side or something like that. Or just trying to limit, I suppose, the running around that I did, just because I wasn't quite as able as a lot of the other kids. I remember running around the school in like a cross-country run and just being at the back of the pack and then falling further and further behind, but really wanting to try. And I guess, back when I was quite young, I was sort of able to do that a bit. And then sort of health deteriorated a little bit from there, and as I went to high school and then started to sit out a lot more than actually even try and participate. So all through high school, it was really sitting out a lot more. So did your parents need to make other families aware of your condition at school? Was there a point where you tried to keep it a secret? If there was, why? If you did, yeah. So I didn't really ever keep it a secret. It's not something that I generally like to bring up, but certainly if I'm asked directly, or I find now it's a lot harder than it was when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I suppose it was like, yeah, I've had a heart surgery, and big deal sort of thing. Tell friends. Some people think it's cool, some not. In terms of making families aware at school, I think if I ever had a sleepover at friends, they would sort of tell the parents. My parents definitely told the schools. At primary school, my mum actually worked at the primary school, sort of knew the teachers on a professional level as well. So that sort of relationship helped a bit. And I remember there being difficulty around like school camps. So I know that my mum actually came on like our grade 6 camp, maybe 5 or one of those. And so she came on that camp, and I think she was invited on that for a number of reasons. But and then when I went to high school, the school was definitely told, because I'd had sort of an arrhythmia issue right at the end of primary school. So I didn't actually find this out till years later, but I always held it against my parents that I wasn't allowed to go on any of my high school trips, camps. Thought, oh, how dare you not let me go on school camps? But, I found out a couple of years ago now, which is many years after high school, that actually the school said to my parents, we don't want to take your child to the school camp because we can't accommodate if anything happens. Which, that sucks, but, whatever. Wasn't a huge deal back then. So, miss out on that, but it wasn't a massive deal. Has there been anything in the way of people around you that have handled certain situations relating to health or deterioration that really upset you? Not really. No. What support, if any, do you think you may have missed out on from your parents or caregivers? I think maybe being kicked out and given independence quicker is something I missed out on, maybe. I suppose, both of them, but mum especially, sort of, really want to help and care, and, which is not a bad thing. But, if anything, it's just that, they care more than, that's probably wrong, more than for my brothers, but no, it's different, I suppose, being a ill child. So I don't know the point I'm trying to make there. How did you go with school and were you able to complete your studies in a time frame that matched your peers? Yes and no. So the only reason it's a no is sort of, like I mentioned, I had a arrhythmia episode at the end of primary school, which my high school was told about, and then high school was fine, all the way until the end of year 11, and then I had another quite big arrhythmia episode. And that sort of kicked off the whole chain of events that eventually led to the Fontan revision. But basically, at that point, I was sort of told by my cardiologist, okay, we want to do intervention. However, we will let you finish your studies. So then all of my year 12, that was literally the end of year 11. And then I think that was the time I was in hospital on Christmas Day. And so the end or the start of year 12, basically I was seeing my cardiologist a little bit more frequently, and they were sort of saying to me, please be stable for the year, and I was thinking the same thing. And then literally the last day of high school, I fell into an arrhythmia, literally finished my last day of high school, mark-up day, all that sort of stuff, celebrate with friends, go to the shops, get takeaway food and all that crap with friends, celebrate last day, get home, play some computer games, and then I'm like, I feel a bit funny. Go to hospital that night, and basically that was a massive arrhythmia episode, lasted for days, cardioverted multiple times, didn't work, and put on heaps of drugs, and then basically was very unwell for quite a few months, and basically couldn't sit my year 12 exams. And so fortunately, very fortunately, I got derived exam scores. So I completed year 12, just not quite the way it's normally done, but I ended up getting my inter score and completing that. So that went pretty well, but at same time frame, but slightly different. So, and then that sort of led to the downfall. Are there any tips you would share with teens about times during your studies? Yeah, so if there's any other teens out there, I suppose just study as hard as you can. High school is not the most important schooling, but it is definitely important. Finish high school, do as well as you can. Study in my opinion, what I did wrong was I would always cram. If you study in smaller blocks, because I had lots of concentration issues, if you religiously study every day or every other day for an hour or so, it's better than studying, once a week for 7 hours. Not only is that, just bad way of studying, but you remember it better by doing little blocks. And then also with your, if you are struggling a bit more with health, then you may actually be able to study with your poorer health, and so spread it out over many days. And then also, if you do need help, ask for it. Ask your school, see if you can get extra time on your exams. I didn't really look at it through high school, but definitely in university. There was, you'd go to the disability support services and they'll be like, oh, do you need extra time? Do you need breaks? Do you need this, that, through exams? So, if you need it, take it and talk to school about it. If you need help, get help. Yeah. How did you feel about leaving high school? Did you recall having different pictures of the future to your peers? Yes and no. I suppose there weren't really any other of my peers struggling with their health like I was. So, while they were all thinking about the future and going on to study and, some of them working and all that sort of stuff, I was more thinking about my health and whether I had a future. Yeah. Did your physical limitations or lifestyle impact your friendships? Definitely impact. I don't know whether it was a really negative impact or not. But yeah, it definitely did impact a lot of the friendships. And I suppose the way it did was just change the dynamic of friendships a little bit. One of the most frustrating things to me, I suppose, before I get on to that, basically, I always tried to go out and, be with friends as much as possible. Even when my energy levels were super low, basically, try and go out, be social, be with friends, because, that helps with your mental health as well, especially when you are sick and all that sort of stuff. Being with friends is good. But I suppose it was wanting to be with friends, and then consciously being like, oh, am I bringing down their enjoyment for this because they're having to wait for me? And I suppose I was really fortunate in that, when we were going out somewhere or something, we'd be walking around and I'd be a lot slower and that sort of thing. I had really good friends who would slow down and wait for me, and, if we went out, or away rather, I've got a friend with a beach house down in Anglesey, and we'd go down there, and quite often I'd be like, really struggling, really short of breath and that sort of thing, and a lot of the time they'd slow down and walk with me, or one or two of them would fall back, And so yeah, you know, definitely did impact friendships, but I think that I was fortunate in that I had some pretty understanding friends, so that definitely helped. But you know, the physical limitations definitely did impact things. There was definitely a number of things that I couldn't do and didn't do because of my health. So yeah. So how did I go with approaching uni, and what did that experience mean to you? Finishing uni, I think you can see my degree up there. Finishing uni was a massive accomplishment for me. Actually finishing it. While I was studying, it was very difficult. You know, I went through a lot. My 3-year degree took me 7-ish years to study for. The last 2 or so years of that study, I was on the transplant waiting list. But finishing it was a massive accomplishment. You know, that's arguably, you know, the proudest thing that I have. The most proud, yeah, yeah, massive. And what exactly is the question? Yeah, how did I go with approaching it? Yeah, basically I ended up applying for a couple of different things that sounded interesting. I ended up doing a health science degree, and I ended up applying. So I think there's another question down here. Yep, the very next question: did you access any special consideration or student support channels at school or uni? So the way that I applied for uni was I applied through the Special Entry Access Scheme, or SEAS, and if there are any other older kids out there that are looking at going to uni or finishing high school, definitely looking to SEAS. You know, basically you lodge a SEAS application and you say, this is how my studies are negatively impacted by my health condition, and then they look at your enter score, which for me was below what the course I wanted to do needed, and they look at your statement and they say, you know what, this kid's been through a lot, we'll offer him a place. And so it's not a guarantee, obviously, you know, really study, try and get as high an enter as you can, but that definitely helped me get into university. And then, like I was saying before, you know, register yourself with disability services, and if you do have a bad month or a bad year, or you know, your health starts deteriorating a little bit, then they, first of all, your name is on their system, they might know your face, and then when you go to them and say, hey, this is happening, I need some help, then they can usually help you in some ways. I also found that my lecturers were very accommodating. You know, I would say to them, oh, I've had a bad month, or I was in hospital, or this or that. They'd go, cool, how long do you need to do this assignment? Or, you know, cool, we can make some arrangements for something else. I think I completed a subject like 2 years after it was already failed, and managed to get a pass for it by talking to the guy that ran the course, and you know, resubmitting our work and chatting to him about it, and he was like, oh yeah, that's really good, what was going on at the time? Oh, okay, yeah, we'll change that. So you know, they're people, and a lot of them are compassionate, and if they can help you, they will. So definitely talk to them about what's going on in your life. You know, you don't have to go into as much detail or whatever if it makes you uncomfortable, but you know, they are more often than not there to help. Any other tips for CHDs who might be looking at uni courses? I think I've covered most everything. Anything else in specifics? No. When you went into Fontan failure, what was life like, and what did you do to help you cope? Life was pretty average in terms of, I guess, physical limitation. You know, struggle with a bit of mental health as well when you're really sick like that. I struggled with activities of daily living, you know, putting my pants on, putting socks on, putting shoes on, brushing my teeth, having a shower, all that stuff was a struggle. Getting up the stairs to my room was a struggle. Yeah, you know, shortness of breath. It's almost at the point now where I forget, or I've completely forgotten how bad things really were. You know, occasionally I've had a cold or something and that might knock you out a bit. Then you're like, oh man, like I feel really run down. But then you remember, well, then you think, oh, was I like this, you know, all those years ago? And yeah, you know, I bought an electric toothbrush because I couldn't brush my teeth anymore. So, you know, you'd sit there brushing your teeth and you'd be panting. You know, I'd get short of breath having a conversation with someone. So, you know, it was pretty affected. You know, I would catch up with friends and go out and stuff like that. And basically, I would do nothing all day and sort of like, you know, save that energy for going out, because I knew that if I did something in the morning or something at all in the day, then I would be ruined and we had to go out. And then I would spend the next, you know, regardless of doing it in the morning or in the evening, I'd spend a day or two or longer recovering after that as well. And, you know, one of the things that I really noticed after transplant was back-to-back long days, complete exhaustion. You just keep doing it and you don't think about it. You just have, you know, 12-hour days full of running around and being nuts, and it's fine, which is pretty crazy. How important has mental health support been on your Fontan to transplant journey and post-transplant? I mean, I haven't had a lot of mental health support. I definitely have had some. I think, you know, attached to the transplant services is a psychologist, and I, you know, catch up with her pretty frequently, and that's really good to, you know, occasionally download some stuff that's going on in your life and talk about things. But, you know, the service is definitely there. With my mental health, usually I've been able to get sufficient support through just, you know, seeing friends and doing other stuff like that. Sort of, you know, if you're having a down period, that tends to perk me up more than, you know, really needing a lot of support services. But you know, the post-transplant stuff is definitely there. The pre-transplant stuff is there. A lot of my transition phase was sort of out of the realm of the children's, so I think around the time when my Fontan was failing, I didn't really have as much support as probably what is there now. Yeah. What role did your parents play, and how did your family approach your transplant? You know, parents were huge. You know, the support from my parents has been massive, and my brothers as well. You know, it was a very hard time. Yeah, so the support from them, you know, was, you know, very good. My mum essentially was my carer post-transplant, and you know, you need that carer for at least 3 to 6 months post-transplant. She ended up taking long service leave. I think all of my mum's long service leave, pretty much, well, not all of it, but the vast majority of it has been taken caring for me, which is a massive sacrifice to make. And you know, that was both when I needed the Fontan revision, and post-transplant. So yeah, that's you know, that's massive support. How did the role of your parents change when you took independence and management for your cardiac care? You know, I mean, it's changed a lot now. I'm definitely a lot more independent than I was. I think I really hung on to that PA, you know, mum PA, personal assistant, for a long time. Hey, mum, can you make an appointment? Or, you know, we're going to the appointment X date. And and then it sort of slowly became a thing of, oh, I've got this appointment and I don't want you to take a day off work because it's just going to be boring and a waste of time anyway, so don't bother. Not a complete waste of time, but that's just, long days at the hospitals, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with. So, it really sort of, the way that I sort of took over my health management, I suppose, was going, okay, I don't really want mum to take a day off work, and I don't really want to have to go to this appointment anyway, but I have to, I have to, but no one else has to. So that's really where I think in myself, where the stem of my transition from parent care to me taking care of everything really changed. The last time both of my parents came to one of my appointments, I'm pretty sure it was to meet the surgeons pre-transplant and talk about that. That's a pretty big appointment, so yeah, mum definitely came to a lot of other appointments post-transplant, but, sort of, it was probably a 4 or 5 year transition where it was, do you want me to come to the appointment? No. Do you want me to come to the appointment? Yeah, maybe this one, but, now it's definitely, I think it's more of a, do you want me to come to an when it's asked, do you want me to come to an appointment? Or like, can I come to an appointment? And it's like, no, I don't even want to be there either, so don't. Not in a bad way. So I suppose now a lot of the questions are moving on to transplant. I suppose just before I move on to transplant, no, never mind. So a lot of the questions now moving on to transplant. How long were you on the waiting list for the heart transplant? I was on the waiting list for 865 days. I always say that, and I say, not like I was counting, but I had a counter on my phone counting down the days. I think it was every 6 weeks, at least every 6 weeks, that I was seeing the cardiologist, and every time I went in there, they'd ask me how long it had been, and I'd just show my little countdown timer. A long time. How do the doctors decide who qualifies for transplant or not? That's a pretty technical list. A lot of people think it's a numbered list. This person's higher than that person on the list, and so they'll get the organ before. It doesn't work like that. When you're assessed for transplant, basically what they do is they admit you for a week and do a bunch of tests on you. And then from those tests, then they have like a multidisciplinary meeting and sort of decide, at least this is my understanding exactly of what the process is. So then they have a big meeting with everyone, go through, they have a doctor go through all the test results and the teams go through that. Then they present the case in a meeting. And from the presentation of the case, then they will sort of make a decision as to whether or not to list someone. And then, in my instance, I found out, you've been accepted onto the list. But then the list is very dynamic. So basically, there's a lot of factors that they test to match for you. There's your blood type, then there's height and weight. So, for example, I would need a heart from someone a similar size to myself, because obviously a much taller, larger person's going to have a larger heart, and vice versa. So it needs to be able to fit inside that chest cavity and not bang around and all that sort of stuff. Pump sufficient blood for someone of size. So that, and then once they do have a heart that they think is going to match, then they will, they'll say this heart may fit, 2 or 3 different patients on the list. Then what they'll do is they'll do a blood test, and so when you're on the transplant waiting list, you have blood tests every month for tissue typing type thing. It's not tissue typing, it's anyway. What they'll do is they'll do that test, and then that might indicate, knock someone off the list because it doesn't match. And then there might be 1 or 2 people on the list left, or maybe 3 or 4, whatever, it doesn't matter. So there'll be a couple of people left on the list, and then what they'll do is they'll say, okay, I might have been on the list for 2 years and someone else might have been on the list for 1 week, but if they are urgently going to die, then they will get that before myself. So, kind of the way that it works is by need, or by match first and then by need, in terms of, life saving and that sort of thing. So, yeah. How did you feel after the transplant? So sort of, this question was sort of added on waking up from transplant. Immediately after transplant. Immediately after transplant was, obviously very painful, but also kind of amazing. I remember waking up and just feeling a pounding in my head, and my body shaking. And it was literally because I had a heart that was pumping how it should. So it was pumping very hard, which my body wasn't used to. The pounding in my head, if I turn my head to the side and lay on a pillow, I just hear this boom, boom, just, you'd hear your heart beat really, really loudly in your ears. And that was kind of amazing. And also, like, waking up, you felt, I felt instantly, like, not breathless. I was laying not quite flat, but, flatter than I would have normally. I was propping myself up at night, every night. And, I felt strong and that sort of stuff. So it was really instantly, noticeably different. Emotionally, what impact did the Fontan transplant have on your life? I think I've kind of already spoken a bit about mental health and emotion. It was, I don't know. What government funding support was available before and after transplant? So before transplant, I was on DSP for quite a few years. And very disappointingly, I was kicked off that quite a lot quicker than I anticipated I would be. That's probably the biggest, not the biggest issue. A very, very unanticipated big issue was being kicked off the DSP long before I felt ready to leave it. I was under the impression that I could be on it for at least a year or so post-transplant, and it wasn't a year post-transplant before I got kicked off of it. I managed to get, I was put on New Start and managed to get like a 6-month leeway to not look for work while I got that. But, it was super disappointing that that whole DSP ending the way it happened was very disappointing and upsetting at the time. Yeah. How did you cope with having to support those around you as you went through a transplant? Yeah. I'm pretty level-headed, and so, I remember when I got the transplant call, it was like 12:30 at night. Sort of woke my parents up. Got the call. Let's go to the hospital. They said to me, it was 12:30. They go, get here about 2 a.m. Don't rush. Don't have a car accident on your way in. And you know, the support from me, I suppose, was just being level-headed. You know, even before the call and everything was real, you know, talking about, you know, death and stuff, even though it was a distinct possibility, you know, no one really wants to talk about that. But, you know, if you say it in a you know, very realistic way of, you know, we need to plan for all potential, you know, potential outcomes. Let's talk about it so that if it does happen, you don't need to make those decisions. You know, the way that I personally tried to help my family was being the most level-headed person through the whole situation. What was the most frightening part of the process? I mean, it sort of goes on with the last question of being level-headed. You know, being level-headed for them, and then for me, basically breaking down when they were gone. You know, once they were gone and I was in the operating theatre on the table with everyone fussing around me, putting lines in and all that sort of stuff, getting ready for it. The whole time they're saying to me, "Oh, just to let you know, don't forget, it could be a false alarm. We may send you home still." You know, that's the time when I really started to go, okay, this is real, and also like, you know, okay, yeah, it's not a particularly, even though it's an exciting time, it's not really a pleasant experience. But you know, that was yeah, when it was real, that's probably when it was most frightening. And then probably having rejection persist for quite a few weeks was also pretty frightening. Next question, how do you go with the anti-rejection drugs? So I suppose that's a good segue from what I just said. You know, the anti-rejection drugs, when you are first transplanted, are brutal, I suppose. You know, you are on very high doses of a lot of medications. Now, the good thing is they've come down a lot. But you know, initially, I had to inject insulin because some of the drugs shoot your blood sugars through the roof. So I had to inject insulin for about 8 months. I had quite bad hand tremors, which, you know, I'm pretty into photography and that sort of thing. And so, you know, hard to do your hobbies, but as I said that, I remembered, well, in reality, the tremors were so bad that I found it difficult eating a lot of the time for the first couple of months because the hand tremors were so bad. You know, weight gain, although, I mean, now I'm just lazy, but back then when I was on lots of drugs, when you're in hospital, they tell you what drugs they're going to give you, and then they give you fact sheets on them and actually sort of make you sit the test. Like, they test you on all the drugs before they send you home, sort of thing. Make sure that you know what they are and what they do and what potential side effects they have. And so I remember being given, you know, all these fact sheets on the different drugs and stuff. And one of the drugs, it's called prednisolone, if everyone wants to look it up. That literally had, like, I think about 2 pages of side effects, when every other drug had, you know, a little paragraph of side effects. And so then, you know, you put on prednisolone and, you know, it affects mood, it affects appetite, it affects, you know, makes you have a big fat face, it sends your sugars sky high, it gives you tremors, just anything bad side effect wise you can think of, that drug gives it to you on higher doses. But you need to take the drug because, you know, immunosuppression is very important, funnily enough. But, you know, anything bad that happened post-transplant, when I look back on it, it wasn't that bad. So even though at the time, you know, it's really sucky, you know, you look back on it a week after you've gone through a bad thing or whatever, and I was just like, you know, it was okay. You know, I had a really bad week in ICU immediately after transplant. You know, the day after I was on the ward, I was like, you know, that was last week. It's fine. So you know, those drugs, while I was on higher doses, were pretty full on. When I had rejection, you know, they give you 100 times your daily dose of prednisolone over the weekend, and that's pretty crap as well. So they do that, and if you still have rejection, then they keep doing it. So I had a couple of pulse doses of prednisolone, and you know, and then eventually got admitted and given something else to you know, stop the rejection. But you know, now what my regime of tablets are, no, they're fine. You know, the side effects from the drugs, definitely there. You know, definitely something that I'll constantly be talking to doctors about, just in small little ways. Nothing too major, but you know, I don't really have a problem with them, which is good. You know, you have a lot of gastrointestinal issues. You can have a lot of that. I had a fair bit of it as well. But you know, you talk to the doctors about it, and usually they can change a drug or change a dose and can help with that sort of stuff as well. So while the side effects, you know, are definitely there, yeah, it's not too bad. What were the mental challenges you faced, and how did you cope with them? And how did your friends and family cope and react? So this is specific to transplant. Going through rejection was really hard. You know, the first 3 months post-transplant, basically, you know, you have your transplant surgery, you're in hospital recovering from that, and then specific to the Alfred, you have a 3-month rehab process where you're literally going to the hospital 3 days a week for 3 months to do rehab in the gym, which is great because, you know, I lost like 12 kilos or something in ICU, and so and muscle, and so I put on muscle, a lot of muscle in those 3 months sort of thing. And actually, having prednisolone stimulate your appetite is really good for putting weight back on. So that was awesome. So, you know, those 3 months, and then on top of those 3 days a week, you have to have a biopsy, you know, very frequently. And so you're at hospital a lot. And then when you have rejection, you know, you're on drugs that affect your mood and emotions and all that sort of thing. So, you know, it can be very emotionally challenging. But yeah, I think it was okay. I think, you know, I think my family handled it pretty well. You know, like I was saying before, they're very supportive. Yeah, and then my friends, you know, again were very supportive as well. So they definitely, you know, some of them definitely affected by it, I think. But you know, I suppose you get to know who your good friends are by them sticking by you and everything, and you know, helping you through it, chatting to you about things, and then you see the concern on their face when you are catching up with them and when you're going through a hard time as well. But yeah, don't know. How has transplant impacted your relationships? It's a really tough one. I basically, when I was listed for transplant, and just before I was listed for transplant, when I was really quite unwell, I basically decided to stop dating because, for me personally, I mean, I'm pretty shy and stuff anyway, and dating's always been hard, but I personally didn't want to invite anyone into my life when I knew it was going to be, when I knew I was about to face a really tough time. So from that, basically, uh, I didn't want to invite anyone into that. I you know I knew it would be hard. I didn't really want to go through it myself. Funnily enough, I knew it would be hard for my family, and I was like, the reality is that, um, I could potentially die, and so these are all things going on in my head, and I suppose this leads back to mental health, and probably, I tried talking about it, but also haven't really spoken about it with someone trying to deal with it, but funnily enough, I was like, I don't really I didn't really feel like it was ethical to invite someone into my life and go, hey, how you doing? Let's start a relationship. Let's fall in love. And by the way, this is what's going on in my life. I'm about to have a transplant. Hopefully things are going to go alright. Are you happy to watch me go through that, and do you want to deal with that together? So basically I stopped dating and didn't date all through while I was on the waiting list. Shortly after transplant, I realised it would have been a lot easier if I had a partner. Saw quite a few people who had partners deal with things and have conversations that I realised that I probably needed. And that support, I suppose, that you can get from your family, but would be different level of support from a partner as well. So definitely, if you have a partner, and you're going down that route, don't sabotage it because you are going through a bad time. Because in my experience, I mean, it's just a guess, but it looked to me from the outside, it looked like it's not without its own issues and dynamics, but it looked from the outside like certain things would have been a lot easier had you had that. So yeah, that's what I did. Probably not the best approach, but that's what I did. Have you met many other transplant recipients, and is there a forum where you can develop relationships with people in similar circumstances? If so, has it been a benefit to you? If not, do you think there is a need? The short answer is yes. I met quite a few other transplant recipients, and they were essentially invaluable. The support I got from a couple of transplant friends was just astronomical. The short answer is there is an organisation for heart and lung transplant recipients, heart and lung because the Alfred does heart and lung, based out of the Alfred Hospital. They are called the Heart and Lung Transplant Trust. I think I may even link to them somewhere, maybe in the description of the video. But basically, it's a organisation based out of the Alfred Hospital who offer a lot of, they offer a support community for heart and lung transplant recipients. Like all groups, you will find, people that you really connect with. And they were great. So meet up with them when you're pre-transplant, if you're on the waiting list. Have a magazine, and they have get-togethers through the year where you can actually meet them. And they are a really good bunch of people, and you can go on there and say, hey, you go to one of the meetups or make friends with some people and you go, hey, have you been through this before? You know, have you done this? Have you done that? And, you know, you find invariably someone who is many more years down the road than you, and they say, yeah, I did that a couple of years ago or many years ago. And yeah, it's definitely good to be able to, you know, chat to them about, you know, perhaps issues that you're going through, or just have a group of people who've been through the same thing and chat to them. You know, I've always found that stuff like that is definitely a bit of help. You know, I made friends with some people who were quite a few years down the track, and, you know, when I had rejection, for example, I spoke to someone and like, hey, have you ever had this drug Atgam before? And they told me all about it, and then you're a little bit more at ease because you're like, oh, yeah, okay, it's you know, someone else has been through it, and you know, I should be able to get through it fine. So they exist. There's some other groups on Facebook and stuff, a bit larger, like that's HLTTV is specific to Victoria. Then there's like a large AHLTA group on Facebook. It's a big forum, which is another group. You'll find on most groups they're dominated by lung transplant recipients because there's just more of them. I think that's right. So yeah, they're around. Has it been a benefit? Yes. Do you think there is a need? Yeah. Well, it exists already. So, yeah. Can you describe the difference between how you felt your healthiest pre-transplant and how you feel now? How would you describe your quality of life now? My healthiest pre-transplant was probably when I was about 15. So, you know, I feel as though, or maybe younger than that even, I feel as though I missed out largely on my 20s because I was pretty much in heart failure for almost all of it. So, yeah, I mean, I can't really describe how I wasn't my healthiest pre-transplant because I don't really remember it. It was so long ago. You know, yeah, no. But now, yeah, it's slightly different. Yeah, you know, for my 1 year transplant anniversary, I ran 5K for the first time in my life. Just did a little loop around a local park with some friends. For my 2 year anniversary, I did a 300k bike ride with HLTTV, raising some money for them. That was over a couple of days, not all in one day. So things are slightly different. Yeah. So if you exercise and train, when I did exercise and train, I was pretty fit and healthy. You know, I've become a bit lazier now and put on a few more kilos than I would have liked to, and that sort of thing. So not as fit as I once was, but still definitely a lot fitter than I was. And in terms of how I describe my quality of life now, you know, I think the last couple of times I've been and seen the cardiologists, they sort of, you know, I ask them about limitations or anything, and they sort of shrug and they're like, what limitations? Like, you know, you're healthy and stable, do whatever you want. You know, which is a different report to get from the doctors to say, for them to say, you know, do whatever you want sort of thing, within reason. But, you know, that's really positive. You know, my life has never really been like that until transplant. For me, it was really a transcendence of health in that, you know, before transplant, I was very hopeful that things would be completely different. And I think that the reality is that they are, you know, in terms of quality of life and ability, it's more than I could have hoped for. Yeah. That's not to say that transplant isn't a very risky proposition, though. I think that's important to say, and I don't think I've really gone over it in terms of what the doctors talk to you about pre-transplant. But transplant is not a perfect science or a perfect medical intervention or a cure. I definitely wanted a transplant pre-transplant, and I wanted it in the manner that I was essentially happy to roll the dice on dying or having something potentially better. I was very aware that there was a very real possibility of dying. People who had transplant, I know people who have had transplants after me who have passed away, and so you can, the surgery itself on someone with a Fontan procedure is very risky, or very technical and complicated. I also have situs inversus, so that sort of added to complexity as well. And so, I knew that it was going to be, very serious, and recovery is not easy. But I really was hopeful that I would get some drastic improvement of quality of life, and not everyone gets it, but I really hoped and wanted that. And that is pretty much what I got. So, I'm very fortunate in that I feel as though my transplant journey has been pretty smooth. But, I look back and think about things and I think, oh no, it wasn't that smooth. But, I think that I've done pretty well post-transplant. And, that's sort of what I went into transplant hoping for. And I really worked for a lot of my fitness as well. So, definitely didn't just get the transplant and sit on it sort of thing. I really, that 3-month rehab that you do at the Alfred, I extended that by seeing another friend who was an exercise physiologist for another 3 months. Spent more time, signed up to a gym and that sort of thing, and really, really tried to recover. And so put in a lot of hard work for it, but always knew that may not have turned out the way I wanted it to. What is involved in your post-transplant healthcare? The number one thing is medication. Medication every day. Medication every day, twice a day. Those meds, in terms of doses and side effects, have dropped hugely. On top of that, though, there's... So I don't really know how to explain this quite properly. There is a medication that they put you on post-transplant called Bactrim. Basically, it's a multi-antibiotic. You have it a couple times a week to help prevent an infection that is sort of out there in the world. And basically, they discovered it because AIDS patients started getting this infection and dying from it. So, post-transplant, you have a really suppressed immune system, so you tend to get, the post-transplant population tends to get a lot of similar infections to AIDS populations because suppressed immune systems, funnily enough, tend to get the same sort of infections. So basically, Bactrim is there to stop this infection, and if you can tolerate Bactrim, then it is a really good, simple drug that you take 3 days a week. I couldn't tolerate Bactrim. Basically, it has a chance to send your white blood cells through the floor. And so basically, I go to the hospital and have a nebulizer of a antibiotic now once a month. And that nebulizer, I've spoken to, again, some other transplant patients that have had it before, a number of CF patients that have had it before. and it is the most noxious and disgusting nebulizer you could ever possibly imagine. It's just terrible, but you know, it's better than ending up in ICU or something with a bad infection, which is very possible post-transplant, so you do it. Post-transplant challenges, i.e. returning to work. Yeah, so I returned to work at the start of 2016, so about 2 years post-transplant. Basically got a retail job, and that was great. It was great in a number of ways. It was a good job. It was great to sort of get back into work when I hadn't worked for, at that stage, like 6 years, I think. And so basically, yeah, it was good. It was hard to get used to working. It was hard to, you know, get up every day, go out, go to a job, work, come home, you know, commute, and have, you know, 12-hour days. You know, not 12 hours of working, but once you had commutes and, you know, from the time you wake up to the time you get home, it's a 12-hour day pretty much. And I found it hard to know what a normal level of tiredness was. So I actually had almost like a little panic, freak out point at one stage. You know, about I think about 5 months into work, sort of called up the clinic and I was like, oh, you know, I'm feeling really unwell, blah blah blah. What's going on? Help me. And so I went into them. Ended up having a biopsy. Just because, you know, they want to make sure. I thought I was having rejection. You know, they give you signs and symptoms of rejection and infection. So I'm talking to them and they're like, all right, look, we'll do a biopsy to be sure and blah, blah, blah. So I ended up having a biopsy. The biopsy came back all clear, and then I was chatting to the cardiologist about life and stuff. And anyway, I was, you know, telling them about what I would do and, you know, what I was feeling, and they were sort of saying to me, yeah, you know, you don't know what it's like to be tired, you don't know what it's like to be well, you don't know what it's like to be normal. So, you know, you think that this is not normal, and that's fine. But, you know, I was chatting to her and she was like, you know, if I did what you were doing, you know, she was saying, you know, if doctors, you know, if they have a full day in the cath lab and they're putting on lead aprons and, you know, they're running around and all that sort of thing, rather than, you know, doing clinics when they're sitting down a little bit more, you know, doctors work brutally hard, but, you know, she's like, you know, if I have a full-on day, then I'm going to be really knackered when I get home, and that's what I was feeling. And so she's like, you know, you're going to feel tired. So for me, a big thing in returning to work was learning what normal was. So, yeah. Wondering if you could please share how you approached work. Did your physical capabilities influence your work type choice? That's a good question. I didn't really have a set approach to work. I sort of just went, oh, I want to do something that I might enjoy. Sort of doing that still now. And so basically the job I had before I left it, I was working at a bike store. So like I said, I did that, you know, a couple 100k bike ride. You know, within 3 weeks after that, I had an interview and started at a bike shop, and worked there for about almost 18 months. And you know, that sort of could be quite physical at times. You know, bikes tend to weigh sort of on average around 10 kilos. They come half built in boxes, and so at certain times you would be lugging around lots of those boxes. And so, you know, it did definitely have its physical aspects to the job. And so, you know, something that I definitely couldn't have done pre-transplant. And so, yeah, you know, it was a somewhat physical job. Definitely had some heavy lifting and that sort of stuff involved in it. And I didn't really think about it, to be honest. You know, I was just sort of like, oh, yeah, you know, um, I'm well now, so I can pick up, you know, 10 odd kilos and that sort of stuff if I need to. So I'm pretty sure I could do that job. And so that's pretty much what I did. Um, Now, though, does physical capability influence it? It does influence my work choice to a degree, but in saying that, I'm actually studying now to be a operating theatre tech, actually, which is still a bit more a lot of manual handling, lifting type stuff, as well as, you know, technical type stuff as well. But um, you know, it does influence it. You know, I'm not going to go and you know, do landscaping or something like that. Um, but yeah, it doesn't really. I mean, I think about it, but also I'm a pretty small guy, so I don't think I'm really physically. Yeah. Did you feel the need to disclose your condition? No. Did you feel the need to disclose your condition to potential employers or colleagues? I didn't really feel a need to do it. I ended up doing it at the bike shop just because it actually came out in the interview. The interview there was really quite strange, um, and basically we were just having a conversation, and you know the conversation was just sort of going, you know, you know, how you doing, you know, how do you like bikes, and so I was talking about the bike ride that I was doing. Then we talk about more stuff, and I'm like, oh yeah, you know, what was it for? It was for this. Oh wow, how do you know that? And I was like, oh well, actually, I had a transplant, so that's how I know it. And this is sort of what I'd gone through, and this, that, and the other. And the guy that was interviewing me really connected with it, and so ended up offering me the job, just I suppose because I, yeah, you know, impressed him with whatever I said. Um, and so that sort of it's really it really plays on my mind a lot about how to discuss it in the workplace and schooling and that sort of stuff. It's sort of like, and you know, relationships and all that sort of stuff. I will never treat it, I don't think, as a secret. You know, if someone comes around and says, you know, if they see my scar or something, like, what's that? You know, what's that from? Whether someone would say that or not, I don't know. You know, why didn't you work for 6 years? You know, it's a pretty big gap. I really feel as though it's just me. I really feel as though it's better to just be upfront in that sort of scenario. But I wouldn't go, oh, you know, I didn't work for 6 years because I had this or went through this. You know, at the course I'm doing now, I sort of didn't really tell people, and there was plenty of opportunity to. And then slowly, as you talk to more people one on one, you know, you get to know someone, and like, you know, this, that, or the other. Why didn't you work for this? Or, you know, I'd say, yeah, you know, DSP is interesting. I was on it for a while. I'm like, oh, why on that? And, you know, it just naturally comes up, sort of thing, and it becomes relevant. I don't really like talking about it unless it's specifically relevant in those sort of new relationships. But like I said, it's definitely not a secret. I don't know what the best method of dealing with it or approaching it is. But yeah, what I do is definitely just sort of saying, you know, holding back, and if it becomes relevant, to bring it up or to add to the conversation, or if it's directly asked, then it's like, yeah, you know, I can't do that because I've had a transplant, or it doesn't really make sense. But you know, yeah, I did that because I've had a transplant. And then, yeah, people typically have reacted positively to it or neutrally. I don't think it's ever really gone negatively. I don't know. But yeah, if anyone has a good method, let me know. Is there anything you'd do differently in applying for jobs, or suggestions on what was really helpful? Um, I think like I just said, I'm just sort of winging it. So yeah, if anyone has best practice, let me know. What would you want someone to know who has a Fontan circulation and is heading towards heart transplant? I think, kind of like what I've been saying, take it very seriously, but also treat it as though it's something that could be very good. You know, it's definitely not something. It's definitely not something to take lightheartedly. But in saying that as well, definitely joke about it, or at least that's how I get through a lot of hard times. You joke about it. You know, take it lightheartedly, but yeah. Transplant is not a cure. Transplant is trading one chronic disease for another. And so you definitely have to treat it with the respect that it deserves, because if you mistreat a transplant, it could potentially have very serious consequences. You know, the transplant nurses at the Alfred would constantly say to you things like, you know, take your meds. If you're having issues, come talk to us first. Do not stop taking your meds and leave it and then talk to us at the next clinic appointment. They say, you know, they have had transplant patients who have stopped taking their meds for whatever reason and then pass away or become very ill or something. There was a guy that I ended up doing rehab with, an older gentleman, and his grandkids were laughing at him because he had the tremors, so he halved one of the doses of one of his medications and ended up with rejection. And you know, the transplant nurses are constantly telling you stories like that and telling you not to do it, for very good reason. You know, they titrate your doses, and they need to be much higher initially, so that you can, survive it, and then slowly bring the doses down and monitor you very closely. So you know, it's something that you need to take very seriously. But also something that, you know, for me, a massive part of coping, especially while waiting for the transplant, coping with a lot of lightheartedness, you know, enjoying the time how you could, and you know, if you can enjoy it by mucking around and laughing, then that's sort of what I did. So yeah. I've got two questions that are kind of very similar. You face a lot for someone so young. How do you feel about life now and the future? And has your view of the future changed since your transplant? So I don't know. The future's just sort of the future. You know, there's lots of things that I hope for. You know, there is certainly like a life expectancy post-transplant, and by that I mean, like, you know, statistical averages. You know, like I did a science degree, so I kind of have read a lot of stuff about life expectancy and stuff. But you know, there's averages at the time that you had your transplant, but then you're kind of living in the advancement as well. So, for example, if I had have had my transplant at the time that I had my Fontan revision, who knows whether or not I'd still be here, because of some of the drugs that I take now just simply didn't exist back then. And would I have handled those drugs? You know, does your body cope with those medications that were there back then? And would I have potentially died of kidney failure by now or something else, if I had have had it back then? And then now, you know, the regimes that they give you with drugs is different. And so, you know, who knows what the future is going to hold. I think for me, the big thing is that I'm just trying to enjoy life. That sounds really cheesy. but yeah, you know, I'm doing a course now to hopefully do something work related that I will really enjoy. You know, I'm trying to get into the healthcare industry, and you know, that's sort of where I've always sort of seen myself. So that's where I want to be. And so hopefully with that, you know, I suppose my view of the future is just that hopefully transplant will mean that I'll be able to, you know, see it for a long time. I think that's pretty much all the questions that I have had. So if there's any more questions, anything specifically that anyone wanted to know, I think you can. I think this will be on Facebook as well. So ask some questions on Facebook. If there's anything specific, ask on Facebook. I'll see if I can answer anything on Facebook as well. I'll do some of that after the fact, probably just in typed responses. And yeah, thanks guys.